Beneath the moonlight in the Nevada desert, a black horse runs through the fog, silent, unbound, needing no light. Behind him, a boy follows eyes holding a forgotten world. But no one knows that horse was once buried alive beneath cement. And tonight, he becomes the voice for children no one ever dared to hear. Subscribe now and don't miss our upcoming soul-stirring stories that will stay with you long after the screen fades. Under the wide, blistering sky of Elko, Nevada, time didn't move forward so much as it dissolved grain by grain, like sand caught in the wind. Nothing grew here unless it was desperate to live. The earth cracked with thirst, the rocks bore the weight of silence and the wind. The wind carried no voices. If you screamed out here, the desert swallowed it whole. 12-year-old Jayden walked that silence like a second skin. At 5:42 a.m., just before the bell rang at school, he stood alone at the edge of a broken fence behind the cafeteria. His face was pale not from fear, but from the exhaustion of always pretending he wasn't there. One hand gripped the strap of his worn-out backpack. The other clutched something tighter, a sketchbook edge's frayed spine nearly coming apart. No one ever asked what was inside. Inside room 204. Ms. Halder took attendance like she was checking items off a broken inventory list. Her voice was nasal-rushed and full of static like an old radio tuned too far left. Jayden Locke. Silence. A pause. Her eyes flicked toward the back of the room where Jayden sat. Shoulders hunched, eyes downcast. A dull pencil between his fingers, unmoving. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. The moment passed like a breeze, no one acknowledged. Absent, she muttered under her breath, already moving on. The other kids chuckled not with cruelty, but with the casual indifference only children raised in dust and neglect could perfect. One boy, Wyatt, leaned over to whisper just loud enough. Maybe if you yell loud enough, the rock will answer. They called him Stone Boy, sometimes Rockhead. Once someone whispered Cave Kid because he didn't speak, and caves echoed emptiness. But Jayden wasn't empty. He was full, so full he might rupture. He sat in the last seat by the window where the desert stretched beyond the glass, raw and untamed. He didn't look outside, though. He looked inward, into the pages of his sketchbook where horses ran not like the ones in books, but like shadows made of memory and silence. Always, always without mouths. In every drawing, the horses had no mouths, just eyes haunting and knowing, just hooves mid-motion, just muscles caught in a frozen gallop. They were his words, those horses. They told the stories he didn't dare shape into syllables. At night, when the world forgot he existed, Jayden would crawl into bed in the boys' home just outside of town. The walls were pale green and smelled faintly of bleach and despair. The bunk beds creaked with every breath. The rules were taped to the doors, printed in Comic Sans, like an insult to real pain. No yelling, no fighting, lights out at 9. No exceptions. He liked the rule about no yelling. It meant no one had an excuse to ask why he didn't talk. He remembered the last time his mother screamed. It had been winter 2 years ago. The snow fell hard that night, loud against the windshield. She had both hands on the wheel, her fingers white with pressure, trying to escape something that didn't need to chase them anymore. The headlights ahead swerved. Her scream cut through him like glass. And then silence, real solid devouring silence. Jayden hadn't spoken a word since. The caseworkers called it trauma-induced mutism. The therapist back in Reno said he'd grow out of it like a phase, like acne or baby teeth. But Jayden knew better. This wasn't a phase. This was permanence. This was the shape his voice had taken after too much was broken inside it. Back in Elko, the boys in the home left him alone. Mostly. Not because they cared, but because Jayden didn't register on their radar. He never raised his hand, never argued, never responded. But they noticed his drawings. He'd wake up some mornings to find a page missing. Someone had taken it. One time they taped a sketch of a mouthless horse to the cafeteria door and wrote underneath, in red Sharpie, "Even your horse thinks you're a freak." Jayden didn't react. He just stopped drawing for a week, but the silence inside him ached. It grew heavy. It needed out. So on the 7th night, after the cafeteria incident, under a full moon that hung low and swollen like an exposed heart, Jayden slipped out of bed and walked barefoot across the cold tile floor. No one stirred. He had the weight of a ghost light and unnoticed. He stepped outside into the wind. Elko was vast at night. The desert glittered with frost and old secrets. The sky pressed down thick with stars. The moon lit the world in silver, casting long shadows that felt more alive than the people inside the buildings he'd left behind. He crossed 3 wire fences, climbed over a locked gate, followed a path only he knew down past the edge of the dried creek bed through the stretch of brittle sagebrush and up the hill where the old barn stood. It wasn't a real barn anymore. It hadn't been for decades. Just a rotting structure with rusted hinges and broken boards. It leaned like it wanted to fall, but was too proud to do so. Jayden entered through a side panel he'd loosened weeks ago. Inside it smelled of earth, old straw, and forgotten time. There he opened his sketchbook again. He sat cross-legged on the ground. Moonlight came through a slit in the ceiling and landed directly on the page. He began to draw. Tonight's horse was smaller than usual. Its eyes were wider, its body leaner. And tonight, just for a moment, Jayden hesitated when he reached the part where the mouth would go. He stared at the spot. His hand trembled. Then he drew the outline of a mouth. Just a faint one. Then he erased it. Again, the horse remained silent. Jayden exhaled slowly. It was the only sound he allowed himself. When he returned to the group home, it was past curfew. No one noticed. No one cared. His bed was cold. The world indifferent. But the sketchbook was warm beneath his hands. A record, a voice, a truth that needed no vowels to matter. The next morning at school, Ms. Halder looked directly at him when she called roll. Jayden Locke. This time he lifted his head slightly. Not enough to count, but enough for her to pause. She squinted at him, then looked away. Absent. Again. In his mind, Jayden repeated the name. Not hers. His. Jayden Locke. A name like a door sealed shut. He wondered what it would take to open it again. And then he saw it. Outside the classroom window. Beyond the chain-link fence. Past the dry riverbed. Something glinted. A sliver of rusted metal. A flash of movement. Something was back there. Something he hadn't noticed before. He pressed his palm to the glass. For a second it felt warm. It could have been nothing. A trick of light. A dream trying to take shape. But Jayden Locke had learned long ago the desert didn't give you dreams. It gave you echoes. And if you were quiet enough, if you listened with the part of yourself that still believed in wild things, you just might hear one call back. Under the thin silver hush of a Nevada moon, Jayden Locke moved like a shadow with purpose. The wind had died. Even the usual low groan of it dragging across sand and dead grass had ceased, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. That night, everything felt suspended, like the whole world had paused to listen to something only Jayden could hear. His feet crunched across the gravel path behind the group home, then over the dried-out creek bed he'd memorized by heart. He didn't carry a flashlight. He didn't need one. The moonlight was enough pale, steady, eerie in its clarity. Beyond the creek was where the land changed. Here, nature gave way to something man had long abandoned. Rusted barbed wire chain-link fences, swallowed in sagebrush signs that once screamed restricted zone, U.S. military installation, now faded to ghost paint. The fence ahead was warped in the middle, bowing out like something had pushed against it for years, until it gave up trying to stay rigid. Jayden approached slowly, slid his fingers across the metal where the rust flaked like old scabs. His breath was low and controlled, the kind that came from knowing you shouldn't be somewhere and going anyway. He ducked under the bent fence, careful not to catch his hoodie on the barbed wire. Once through, he found himself on a stretch of cracked asphalt, lined by rows of crumbling cement buildings. Their windows were either shattered or covered in thick plywood. One had a metal door sealed shut with a giant iron lock that had turned orange with time. Bullet holes pocked one of the walls like a forgotten story. Jayden didn't know what this place had been exactly. Some kids at school called it the nuke yard and said the Army used to test experimental weapons here back in the 60s. Others said it was just an old communications base. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that something in his chest had pulled him here. A feeling, a throb. Like gravity, but colder. He walked the perimeter of one of the larger buildings, running his hand along the cement, feeling for. He didn't even know what. Not until he saw it. It was nothing at first. Just a hairline crack running vertically down a section of concrete near the back corner. But when the moonlight hit it at just the right angle, Jayden saw it shimmer like it was breathing. He stepped closer. The air here was different, cooler. It shouldn't have been. There was no wind, no opening, and yet something slipped through that crack in the wall. A breath, a pulse, a sound. Jayden froze. There it was again. A shuffle, a weight shifting, not mechanical, not wind, alive. He leaned in until his ear was pressed to the cool cement. He held his breath. Silence. Then barely audible, a soft, dragging exhale. Jayden's spine lit up with electricity. Something was inside. He stepped back, squinted, and traced the wall upward. It was thick, taller than two grown men with no visible entry. But the sound, it hadn't been imagined. He wasn't that kind of kid. His mind didn't make things up. Not anymore. It hadn't had the freedom to do that since the night the car slid off the highway with his mother inside it. He circled the structure, scanning for a seam, a break, a sign of a door. Near the far end, partially buried beneath tumbleweed and broken tiles, He found something strange, an old concrete ramp descending at a slight angle, partially obscured by sand. He knelt, started brushing it away with his sleeves. The further he cleared, the more the shape emerged, stair-like ridges leading down into the earth. A bunker. He followed it step by step, heart pounding. The entrance at the bottom was a rusted steel door, slightly ajar. A single chain hung from the top, snapped in half, the other side dangling into darkness like a warning. Jayden hesitated, not out of fear, out of deep knowing that once he went in, something would change. He pulled the door further open, and the smell hit him first, damp earth mold, old metal. And underneath it all, something oddly sweet, like hay. He stepped inside. It was pitch dark. The moonlight barely reached the threshold. But Jayden moved forward, hand against the wall, tracing his way by instinct. The floor was uneven, soft in places, gritty with sand and dirt. He turned a corner and the air shifted again. It grew warmer. Then came another sound, a snort, soft, wet. He stopped breathing. In the stillness, he waited. His eyes began to adjust, and faint shapes emerged from the gloom. A stall, bars thick and rusted, forming the outline of a pen. A metal gate slightly ajar. Inside, unmoving, stood a horse, jet black, massive, and completely silent. It stared at him, eyes so wide and dark they reflected no light, only pulled it in. There was no panic in its body, no flaring nostrils, no pawing hooves. It didn't rear or kick. It just watched him. Jayden couldn't move, couldn't even blink. It was as if time knelt in reverence for this creature, this impossible presence beneath a military ruin. A contradiction made of breath and bone. He took a step forward. The horse didn't react. Another step. He reached out, slow palm forward. The air between them pulsed. When his fingers brushed the animal's neck, he expected heat. A twitch, something. But what he felt was stillness. Not deadness, but presence at rest. It was like touching a river that had stopped mid-flow. Jayden's mouth parted slightly, but no sound came. There was nothing to say. There was too much to say. He ran his hand along the horse's jaw down to its chest. The skin was thick, smooth, layered with dust. It hadn't been groomed in years, but it was healthy, strong. Then he noticed it. The silence, not just of the room, of the horse. No sound, no whinny, no breathy snort, not even a hoof scrape. And then it hit him. The animal hadn't made a single sound, not one, even when he entered, even now as they stood inches apart. Jayden pulled back slowly. The horse tilted its head slightly, almost curious. The motion mirrored Jayden's own slight, precise watching. It was like looking in a mirror that didn't reflect his face, but his soul. He sat down on the floor just outside the stall, legs crossed, sketchbook already in his lap. The pencil moved on its own. He didn't sketch fast. He sketched like remembering. Each line deliberate, each curve heavy with recognition. When he finished, he turned the page toward the horse. The drawing showed it exactly as it was, silent, watching impossible. He looked at the creature again, and in a whisper so soft he didn't know he still had it, he said, "Echo." The horse didn't flinch, didn't blink, but Jayden knew that was its name. Not because it repeated sounds, because it didn't. Because it was the shape silence made when it lived too long in a cage. Echo. Jayden stood. He looked around the stall now with a new clarity. The walls were reinforced with concrete. The door had no handle. The lock, if it had existed, had long been removed or rusted to oblivion. There were pipes along the far side, a half-broken feeding trough, and a rusted water basin. Someone had kept this horse here, on purpose, for a long time. But why? Jayden stepped backward into the corridor again, this time tracing the walls with his fingers as he exited, noting faint etchings carved into the cement. Military codes, numbers, a name long scratched out. Outside, the wind returned, whistling faintly through the broken beams. Jayden looked back at the entrance, half expecting the horse to vanish like a hallucination, but Echo remained. He turned his face upward toward the moon. The clouds passed slowly, revealing a full circle of light, brighter than he'd ever seen it. Echo hadn't made a sound, but Jayden had heard something, a calling, and for the first time in years, he whispered to the night, like it might answer back, "I found you." And in the hush that followed, even the desert paused to listen. Under the weight of darkness, where the desert shivered without sound, Jayden Locke became a boy with a secret, and the secret had eyes. Not just any eyes. Eyes like twin wells filled with the kind of silence that understood. Echo never moved first, never flinched, and never not once made a sound. But he watched, always watched. That first night had split something inside Jayden wide open. The kind of rupture that doesn't bleed, but seeps slow, internal, inevitable. So he went back, the next night and the one after. Each time slipping out of the group home after lights out, moving barefoot across the tiles, past the broken blinds, through the sleeping breath of boys who talked too much in the day and dreamed of nothing at night. He carried what he could, a small bundle of hay stolen from the animal supply shed 2 blocks away. A plastic jug filled with tap water, his sketchbook always pressed to his chest like a shield. The way down to the bunker became a ritual. He no longer hesitated at the fence, no longer flinched at the squeal of the door hinges. Even the old scent of rot and rust became familiar, a kind of perfume to memory. Echo would always be there, standing in that same corner cloaked in shadow, waiting. Their routine never changed. Jayden entered. Echo looked at him. Jayden poured water into the rusted trough, laid down the hay, gently careful not to scatter it like trash. Then he'd sit, sometimes on the floor, sometimes cross-legged near the stall gate, arms wrapped around his knees. And Echo, he never whinnied, never nickered or pawed or snorted like the horses in Jayden's old books. He just nodded, once. That nod meant more than entire conversations. It was acknowledgement, it was trust, it was enough. Jayden found comfort in the quiet. Not just any quiet, but this one. Shared, known, occupied. The world above the bunker was loud in its cruelty. Doors slammed, voices shouted, even whispers came sharp and coded. People used words like weapons, blunt, cold, unforgiving. But down here, there were no words. Only presence, only stillness, only the hum that echoed between a boy and a horse who understood what it meant to be locked in place and expected to survive. Jayden started bringing things beyond food and water. One night he brought a brush stolen from the stable behind the vocational school. The bristles were stiff with neglect. But when he approached Echo's stall and held it up, the horse didn't recoil. He just stood there, head slightly lowered. Jayden reached through the bars. At first his fingers trembled. He hadn't touched anyone not willingly in over a year. The last time he reached out, it had been to grab his mother's sleeve as she packed a suitcase. She'd said, "Don't, baby." "I can't," and yanked away. That moment had become scar tissue in his bones. But Echo didn't pull away, didn't resist. Jayden pressed the brush against Echo's shoulder and began slow strokes. 1, 2, 3. Each movement shed layers of dirt and dust, but also something deeper, something between them. And Echo, he didn't twitch, didn't blink. His eyes locked on Jayden's, calm and endless. A connection formed not in words, but in gestures, in breath, in mutual permission. Jayden began to speak not out loud, but with his body. He would sit closer, let his legs stretch into the stall. He would open his sketchbook and draw, while Echo chewed quietly. Sometimes he held up a picture mid-sketch, and Echo would tilt his head as if to study it. Sometimes Jayden smiled, not wide, not often. But it happened. And once, just once, Echo stepped forward, closing the space between them, and lowered his muzzle onto Jayden's shoulder. They stayed like that for what felt like an hour, but might have only been minutes. Jayden didn't breathe. He didn't have to. Everything necessary was already in the silence. And the moon, always the moon, was there. Through a jagged crack in the ceiling, it would cast a cold white light down into the stall like a divine spotlight. Jayden would wait for it. He came only on full moons now, timing his visits so the silver glow would flood the space in just the right way. It became their moment. No words, no movements. Just 2 figures, one boy, one beast, standing perfectly still under the light. Under that moon, Echo looked like a myth. His black coat turned almost blue, his breath invisible, his body still as stone. Jayden often wondered if anyone else could see what he saw. If someone else walked into the bunker at that moment, would they believe? Or would they laugh and say it was just a horse? They didn't know the truth. Echo wasn't just a horse, he was a mirror. Every time Jayden stood before him, he saw himself unspoken, unseen, but still standing. And one night, as Echo slept standing up, head bowed slightly, Jayden stood and looked at the far wall of the bunker. It was blank, concrete, cracked with time. He stepped forward, pulled a piece of charcoal from his sketch kit, and hesitated only a second before writing across it. Some sounds are only heard by the heart. He stared at the words for a long time after. He didn't know why he wrote them. Maybe he wanted Echo to see it. Maybe he wanted to believe it himself. But it felt true, truer than anything he'd ever said aloud, which truthfully wasn't much. The words remained. Every time he came back, they were still there, unwashed, unaltered, like a vow between 2 silences. And as the visits continued, Jayden began to notice something shifting, not in Echo. Echo remained the same calm, grounded present. But in Jayden, the way his shoulders didn't curve inward so much anymore. The way his fingers didn't shake when he opened the stall. The way he lingered after brushing Echo's coat like he didn't want the moment to end. He had no idea how long Echo had been down there, how he survived, who put him there. None of it made sense, but maybe it didn't have to. Some things weren't made to be understood. Some things were just made to be found. And Echo Echo had been waiting. Jayden began to look forward to nightfall, not as escape, but as return. Every day at school still felt like a long walk through numbness. Kids still whispered. Teachers still avoided eye contact. And the boy with the weird drawings and the silent mouth remained an afterthought. But he had somewhere to be. He had someone who waited. And in that underground world where words had no dominion, Jayden started to feel whole. He started to believe that silence wasn't a prison, it was a language. An echo. Echo was fluent in it. Sometimes Jayden would sit with his back against the concrete wall and sketch their silhouettes, him on one side of the bars, Echo on the other, both bathed in moonlight. He started adding stars, wind, a horizon. He started imagining a world outside the bunker, a world where they could run. But that wasn't tonight. Tonight they stood still, Jayden with his palm pressed to Echo's chest. Echo unmoving save for the blink of an eye. Above them, the moonlight carved a path across the cracked floor. No words passed. None were needed, only a heartbeat shared. Only breath exchanged. And in that stillness, a promise formed between them. That silence, real silence, was not emptiness. It was understanding. And they had finally found it. Under a bruised Nevada sky, the night cracked open like a secret too heavy to keep. The full moon hung low again, wide silver watching. Jayden stood at the edge of the bunker's ramp with his hand resting on Echo's neck. The horse was calm, steady, massive in the moonlight, as if carved from shadow and old breath. It had been weeks, maybe more, since Jayden first found Echo. In that time, they'd grown into something not quite friendship, not quite survival. Something older, something nameless. But lately the air down there had begun to feel tighter, like it was time for movement. Echo's legs twitched more when Jayden brushed him. His ears flicked toward the exit tunnel. He had begun to circle his stall hooves, silent against the dirt, not with panic, but with longing, and Jayden felt it too. So he did something he wasn't sure he could undo. He opened the stall gate wide. Echo didn't bolt. He didn't even step forward. He simply stood muscles still, eyes on Jayden as if waiting for permission. Jayden moved first slowly backward toward the tunnel, one step at a time. Echo followed. Up the ramp, past the rusted door, into the cold bite of wind. When Echo finally stepped onto the desert surface for the first time in who knew how many years, he paused. Moonlight poured down on him like a baptism. Jayden thought the horse might rear, might cry out, might sprint, but Echo only breathed. One deep inhale. Then his ears perked. Jayden reached out, touched his flank. And then, without a single command, without a tug of rein or sound, Echo moved. He ran, fast, but smooth. His hooves barely stirred the dust. He didn't trip or falter. He moved like he knew exactly where everything was, as though the desert whispered directions straight into his bones. Jayden chased him, not to control him, but to witness. They ran together across the pale flats, behind the old installation, past broken fence lines, across moonlit ridges. Jayden's heart thudded in sync with Echo's gait. For the first time in his life, he felt the rhythm of something bigger than breath. But they weren't alone. From the porch of a trailer that sat half sunk into the hillside, an old man watched through binoculars. James Breen had lived in Elko longer than the town remembered. Once a military vet, then a vet of a different kind, horses, cattle, broken things. He had a voice like gravel and lungs scarred from time and war. His trailer was a graveyard of rusted tools and forgotten animals. And yet his eyes sharp still caught the impossible as it ran across his land. A black horse nearly spectral slicing the night open, and a kid, the silent one, the sketcher. Jayden. James didn't call anyone, not yet. He waited. When Jayden and Echo finally slowed near the edge of a rocky outcrop that overlooked a cluster of burned trees, Jayden was out of breath, chest heaving. Echo stopped beside him as if they'd done this 1,000 times. Jayden turned, looked around, saw the old trailer and the man on the porch. They locked eyes. Jayden froze. James stood slowly, one hand gripping a cane, the other still holding the binoculars. For a moment no one moved. Jayden turned back toward Echo. His mind raced. Should he run? Should he beg? Echo didn't move. He simply turned his head toward the porch and stared. And James stepped off the porch. He didn't yell, didn't accuse. He walked slow and deliberate until he stood about 10 feet from Jayden. "That's a damn ghost you've got there," he said finally. Jayden didn't speak. Of course not. He took a step backward. Echo took one forward. James raised a hand, not threatening, just tired. "Easy, not here to ruin it." Jayden's chest rose and fell. James studied the boy, then the horse, then the way they stood together. "You find him down in the ruins?" Jayden didn't answer, but his eyes said yes. James sighed. He pointed to the horse. "You know what that is." Still nothing. James stepped a little closer. "You think he's just a horse?" But he's not. He's something they tried to turn into a machine. That made Jayden's brow twitch. James noticed. "Yeah, I was there. Long time ago. Back when the army didn't know what to do with silence, so they tried to weaponize it. He nodded at Echo. They called them magnetic trackers, horses trained to move in pitch black through landmines, through jungles, through shit you wouldn't believe. But it wasn't just training. They did something else. Embedded sensors. Neurocalibration. They messed with instinct. Jayden's eyes widened. James looked down. Didn't work. Not the way they wanted. Most of the horses lost it. Broke down, went wild. The ones who didn't, they locked him up. They locked. He looked at Jayden again. I figured they all died out decades ago. But looks like one made it. Jayden lowered his head. James walked closer. Listen, kid. I don't know how you found him, or how you kept him fed. But what you've got here, that's not a pet. That's a ghost wrapped in muscle. He stopped right in front of Jayden. And now you've got a choice. Jayden blinked. James pointed a gnarled finger at Echo. This secret, it's power. It's danger. It's beauty. But it's not free. The night held them in place. Even the wind stopped. James's voice dropped. You keep him hidden, he stays safe. Maybe you both do. But secrets, they don't stay secrets. Not forever. He took a breath. Sometimes keeping a secret saves a life. And sometimes it buries it. Jayden's eyes were glassy now. But he didn't cry. He reached out, touched Echo's neck. The horse leaned into it. James looked at them both. Saw something sacred there. Whatever you do, he said, his voice lower now. Don't lie to yourself about why you're doing it. Are you protecting him? Or are you just afraid to lose the one thing that sees you? Jayden swallowed hard, and then he did something he hadn't done in years. He nodded. James turned to leave. As he did, he muttered, Come by tomorrow. I'll give you proper feed. This desert won't keep that horse alive forever. Jayden watched him walk back to the trailer. He waited until the door shut behind the man before turning back to Echo. They stood there for a long time, boy and horse, under the moonlight, under the weight of knowledge that could shatter everything. Jayden looked at Echo and whispered without sound, I see you. And in Echo's stillness, he felt the answer. I see you too. The rain came without warning. Not the desert drizzle Elko sometimes knew in springtime, but a violent, growling storm that cracked the sky open and spat fury down into the canyons. It rolled in from the west like an invading army lightning knifing the clouds. Wind yanking trees sideways, water surging into gullies that hadn't tasted moisture in years. By the time the town's emergency sirens wailed, it was already too late for planning. Roads vanished beneath mud. The two main creeks burst their banks like busted pipes. A red pickup was found floating upside down outside Baker's Ranch. The volunteer fire department called for help, but most of the force was spread across 5 counties dealing with the same storm. That's when Jayden showed up. No one saw him arrive. He just appeared on the edge of the volunteer rescue zone, standing next to Echo, like they belonged to the night itself. The people gathered under the main tent didn't recognize him at first. Just another kid in a soaked hoodie holding the reins of a black horse so still, it might have been sculpted from the storm. But when Sheriff Gaines looked up from the muddy map and saw the boy's eyes steady, unreadable, he didn't ask questions. They needed help, and help had come. The plan was simple. There were 2 missing children last seen near the southern ridge, above Stag Hollow. Twin sisters, 9 years old. Their family's trailer had been swept off its foundation. The search dogs couldn't navigate the terrain, too slick, too unstable. ATV crews had tried but got stuck. Air support was grounded by fog. Jayden just stood there. Then he pointed once to the dark ridge, where the storm clouds folded into the mountains. Sheriff Gaines nodded like he understood a language no one else could hear. Go. Jayden climbed onto Echo's back without a saddle. No commands, no rope, just a whisper of motion. Echo responded like the rain answered to him. They disappeared into the floodlit trees, swallowed by fog. The forest beyond the last fence line was chaos. Fallen branches, mudslides, visibility no more than a few feet. The fog hugged the ground in thick sheets, muffling all sound. But Echo didn't hesitate. He moved like he'd memorized the map of every route, every rise, every invisible ledge. His hooves struck only stable ground, and Jayden, his arms wrapped tight around the horse's neck, held on with the trust of a blind man, gripping a memory. They crossed a washed-out bridge, ducked under barbed wire, and followed a trail no human could see. Jayden closed his eyes. He didn't need them. He felt everything through Echo, each subtle twitch, each pause, each breath. It was a rhythm, a song written without notes. Jayden could feel the ground shift through Echo's muscles. He could sense the change in terrain from the way Echo's head tilted or how his ears flicked toward unseen things. And then a sound, faint, a cry. Jayden lifted his head, listening. Echo had already stopped moving. The sound came again, softer, garbled, wet. Jayden slid off Echo's back landing, ankle deep in freezing mud. He pulled a flashlight from his jacket and scanned the ridge. Nothing but mist. Then he saw it. A scrap of pink fabric caught on a branch. He bolted toward it. 30 feet ahead, beneath a ledge partially buried by fallen rocks and debris, he found them 2 small girls huddled beneath a bent tree trunk. One was crying softly, the other shivering violently. Jayden dropped to his knees, pulling off his jacket. He wrapped it around the smaller girl's shoulders. Her lips were blue. She looked up at him with terrified eyes. "Are you real?" she whispered. Jayden only nodded. He couldn't speak, but he didn't need to. He tapped his chest once, then pointed toward Echo, who stood like a sentinel in the clearing. The older girl whispered, "Is that a unicorn?" Jayden smiled barely. He motioned for them to climb onto Echo's back. The girls hesitated, but Echo didn't move, didn't blink. He simply lowered himself slightly, an impossible gesture of submission. Jayden helped them mount. He pressed both palms flat against Echo's side, then stepped back. The horse carried them through the fog the same way he had come, sure-footed, fast, silent. Jayden ran behind them, lungs burning, boots slipping through ankle-deep water, heart pounding with more than adrenaline. By the time they reached the edge of town, the fog was thinning. Flashlights bobbed in the distance. Someone shouted. People ran. Sheriff Gaines met them at the fence line. The girls were lifted from Echo's back by EMTs, blankets, oxygen, tears. Jayden stood off to the side, soaked, shaking, but not from cold. He looked at Echo, and Echo looked back. They had done it. For a moment, no one knew who the boy was. But cameras had arrived. A local news van, headlights cutting through drizzle. A woman with a mic turned toward Jayden. "Wait, who is that? Is that his horse? How did he find them? Someone else. Where did he come from? Did he just ride out of the storm?" Flashes lit the night like lightning. Jayden backed away. Echo moved with him. Sheriff Gaines stepped between them and the reporters. "Let the kid go." Jayden walked to the edge of the lights, then turned and vanished down the same trail he'd come from. Echo beside him. No trace? No thanks. Only silence. The next morning, headlines hit local feeds. Mystery horse saves girls in Elko flood. Silent rider vanishes after heroic rescue. Who is the boy with the black horse? Jayden saw them taped to windows, buzzing on phones, and school whispered about in the halls. But no one linked it to him. He made sure of that. At night, he didn't go home. Not right away. He took Echo deep into the desert, away from cameras, away from names. He didn't want recognition. He wanted to keep Echo safe. James, the old vet, met him behind the feed barn a few nights later. He handed Jayden a new saddlebag filled with proper food, bandages, and supplies. "You did good," James said gruffly. Jayden didn't respond. James looked at him for a long time, then muttered, "You know they're gonna come looking." Jayden looked away. James stepped forward, voice low. "What you've got ain't just magic, kid. It's danger. It's a light, and lights attract attention. You ready for that?" Jayden tightened the strap on Echo's gear. James sighed. "You're not gonna let them trace him, are you?" Jayden shook his head once, and he meant it. From that moment on, every time Jayden and Echo responded to a call, because they did again and again, he made sure no one knew where they came from. Only at night, only in fog, only when the world was too broken for questions. And when the work was done, they vanished. Word began to spread, but not in a viral way. In the old way, stories whispered across truck stops, campfires, the back corners of schools. A boy and his silent horse who show up in the dark, who never ask for anything, who disappear like smoke. Jayden became legend without trying. And Echo was no longer a ghost. He was a symbol, not just of survival, but of what happened when two broken things found each other and chose not to stay broken. She stepped off the Greyhound bus, wearing city boots and carrying silence like a second suitcase. Clara Monroe had been to enough broken towns to recognize one the moment she breathed it in. Elko, Nevada smelled like rust. Old blood and something older still, like the desert had tried to forget, but failed. She tightened her coat as wind knifed through the lot. Her press badge hung around her neck, not for show, but as a warning. I see what no one wants seen. The rumors had found her weeks ago. A ghost horse spotted during a flash flood rescue. A black stallion with no origin, moving through fog like it belonged to it. Two children pulled from a landslide swore it had no voice. Their mother insisted the rider never spoke. The sheriff refused to comment. No one knew where the horse came from. But Clara had seen enough legends born from pain to know this wasn't just a wild story. It was a scream disguised. She began at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Gaines gave her half a minute, then shut the folder and looked her in the eye. We don't know who he is, and if we did, I wouldn't tell you. You're protecting a minor? Clara asked, voice even. I'm protecting something sacred, he replied. Clara stared at him long enough to force a pause. Look, Gaines sighed. You want to dig around, fine. But don't ruin it just because you want a headline. She left without another word. It wasn't a headline she was chasing. It was herself. A week into the search, Clara found a thread. At the local community center, a janitor named Dolores told her about a boy who didn't speak who drew horses in the corners of his notebooks. Always black, always mouthless. One of the kids said he kept to himself, but walked the edge of the hills after curfew, always with a pencil in hand. Clara asked to see the notebooks. She wasn't prepared for what she saw. The horses there were dozens, were carved in strokes both delicate and violent. Some almost scratched through the paper. The shapes were graceful, but wounded. Some running, some still. And always, no mouths. She took photos, then returned to her motel and pulled up an archived file she hadn't opened in years. Project Echo, Phase D, Equine Neural Conditioning Unit, 1971. Her mother had once been stationed on the edge of a similar base years ago in New Mexico. Clara had found the file buried in a footlocker after her mother's death, the government reports sketches. Even a few grainy photographs of black horses, unnamed, faceless. One of them? Clara stared at her screen, breath slowing. One of the photos showed a horse mid-gallop. It wasn't just black. It wasn't just wild. It was the same horse in the boy's drawings. Same head tilt, same fractured grace. She printed both images, circled the matching elements, and taped them to her motel mirror. This wasn't just coincidence. This was resurrection. The next day, Clara followed the boy. She didn't speak, didn't make herself known, just watched from alley's parking lots, shadows. Jayden moved with a slowness that suggested control, not fear. His eyes scanned for exits. His fingers stayed curled around something invisible. His silence wasn't empty. It was armor. That night, she waited by the edge of the creek bed. When Jayden appeared, hood-pulled tight backpack slung low, moving in practiced steps, Clara didn't approach. She followed at a distance, careful not to disturb the rhythm of his secret. They reached the edge of the ruins. Jayden paused. Clara crouched behind a rusted satellite dish, her breath low. He checked the horizon, then disappeared into the broken facility. Clara crept closer, slid past the collapsed gate and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When she finally stepped inside, the air changed. It was colder, denser, as if the walls had learned to listen too well. Down the ramp, past the rusted door, she heard nothing, not even footsteps, until she reached the lower level. There, illuminated by a crack of moonlight through broken concrete, stood the boy, and beside him, the horse. She gasped, soft, instinctive. Echo didn't flinch. Jayden turned. Their eyes met. He didn't move, didn't speak. But she felt the scream behind his eyes, not panic, betrayal. She stepped forward slowly, hands raised. I'm not here to hurt you. He said nothing. She looked at Echo, bigger up close, almost mythical. He stared at her like he saw through time. Clara knelt. I know what this is. Jayden's fists tightened. You draw him, don't you? She asked. You've been drawing him for months, maybe years. Still no answer. She reached into her coat, pulled out the printouts, held them up. This is your sketch. And this is a military file from 1971. It's the same horse, Jayden. He flinched. She hadn't said his name before. I'm not here to expose you, she said, her voice softer now. I'm here because I was you. That made him blink. She stood. When I was 9, I lived in a house that didn't believe in children. My father broke my ribs when I dropped a plate. My mother called it discipline. I used to sneak out and sit in the backyard for hours just to hear something that didn't scream. Jayden's lips parted just slightly. I used to pretend I had a horse, she continued. Big, silent, unbreakable. I called him Atlas. She looked at Echo. Turns out he was real, just not for me. Jayden turned away. I know why you keep him hidden, Clara said, stepping closer. He's yours. He listens. He sees you. In the world, people like me ruin what they don't understand. She paused. But maybe he's not just yours. Jayden's breath caught. Clara stepped to the wall, ran her fingers over the charcoal words etched there. Some sounds are only heard by the heart. She closed her eyes. You can hide from the world, she said. But are you hiding from yourself? Jayden looked up. His face cracked barely. But the ache behind his eyes spilled through the space between them. Clara didn't push. She turned to leave. Before she stepped into the tunnel, she said one final thing. I'm not here to take him. I'm just here to make sure the world knows what it did and what it almost lost. The door closed behind her. Jayden stood for a long time. Echo pressed his head gently against the boy's chest. Jayden trembled but didn't cry. He wasn't sure what to feel. Clara's words rang inside his ribs like a tuning fork. Maybe he's not just yours. He wanted to reject it. But part of him, some splinter lodged in his soul, knew it was true. The drawings weren't just for hiding anymore. They were messages, signals. He'd drawn Echo 100 times. But lately he'd been drawing Echo running through cities, through fire, through crowds, through children's dreams. Jayden slid down the wall, sat beside Echo, and opened his sketchbook. He flipped past the old ones, stopped on a blank page. His pencil hovered. He didn't know what he was drawing yet, but for the first time, he knew it wasn't just for him. The dream began like all the others, quiet, slow, and deceptive. Jayden stood in the middle of the desert, barefoot, the ground beneath him hot and pulsing like a heartbeat. The moon hung low and thick in the sky, its light dimmer than usual, like it had forgotten how to shine. The wind carried no sound, not even Echo's breath. He turned. The bunker was gone. In its place stood a monolith of concrete, towering, seamless, and cold. Its surface was the same color as the sky. There were no doors, no seams, no sign that anything had ever entered or exited it. But he knew Echo was in there. He approached slowly, each step echoing louder than it should. The silence around him pressed into his ears, deep and suffocating. He raised a hand and knocked once softly on the wall. No sound. He tried again, harder. Still nothing. It was like knocking on memory, thick, unresponsive, indifferent. He stepped back, squinting up at the concrete eyes, scanning for a crack, a shadow a way in. But it was sealed, and somewhere behind that dead gray silence, he felt Echo thrashing. He couldn't hear it, but he felt it. The panic. The confusion. The betrayal. Jayden opened his mouth to scream. Nothing came out. No sound, no air, no voice. He dropped to his knees and clawed at the wall with his bare hands. It didn't give. The moon above flickered like a dying bulb, and then without warning, it vanished completely. Everything went black. Jayden woke up drenched in sweat, chest-heaving fingers clenched into the thin blanket on his cot. The room was quiet. Too quiet. The hum of the heater had stopped. The hallway lights outside his door flickered once, then went dark. He sat up, ran a hand through his hair, and reached for the sketchbook on the floor beside him. He opened it, flipped past the familiar pages. Echo under moonlight. Echo running through fog. Echo with his head pressed to Jayden's chest. Then he stopped. There was a blank page. And without fully knowing why, he began to draw. Not Echo this time. Not the desert. He drew the wall from his dream. Tall, flat, endless. But this time he added something else. Cracks. Thin at first like veins, then thicker. He kept going, pencil scratching furiously, hand trembling until the wall was covered in fractures. Jagged, crooked lines that split through the concrete like it was trying to speak. When he finished, he stared at it. The wall was broken now, but not destroyed. And behind those cracks barely visible, he began to sketch something new. An eye, watching, waiting. That morning, Clara's article went live. He saw it on a phone screen left unlocked in the common room. A headline in bold red letters, Ghost Horse or Government Experiment. The untold truth of Project Echo. His lungs stopped working. He read it twice. Clara had done what she said she wouldn't. Or maybe what she'd always meant to. She had released the classified files, photos, maps, reports, descriptions of early neural experiments on horses meant to navigate combat zones silently. And at the end of this piece, one image, Jayden's drawing. She had scanned one of the sketches and blurred the signature, but it was his. There was no mistaking it. He dropped the phone like it burned him. His ears buzzed. His stomach flipped. He stumbled outside into the cold, breathing hard, trying to keep his insides from collapsing. The sun was already up. The world looked normal. Too normal. He sprinted, feet pounding the sidewalk, arms pumping, vision narrowing. He ran the way he hadn't run since the flood. But this time he wasn't chasing anything. He was running from everything. By the time he reached the ruins, his legs were shaking. The fence was half collapsed. Someone had been here. He slipped through yard hammering, down the familiar ramp, past the rusted door. And then he stopped. The bunker was empty. Echo was gone. Jayden stood in the silence and waited. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe Echo was in the shadows. He whispered, "Echo," but there was no answer. He moved forward, checked the stall. The hay was undisturbed. The water trough was dry. No hoofprints, no warmth. Jayden dropped to his knees. It felt like the dream again. Only this time he was awake. His breathing grew shallow. His chest ached like it was caving in. He pulled out his sketchbook with shaking hands, flipped to the cracked wall again, and for the first time, he cried. Not with sound, not with sobs, but with his whole body. Tears dropped onto the page, blurring the lines. He pressed his forehead to the cold concrete, and for the first time since his mother died, he said something out loud. "I'm sorry." The words were barely a whisper, but they echoed. Not through the room. Through him. He sat like that for what felt like hours. Then a sound. Not hooves. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. He turned. Clara stood at the entrance. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with sleepless regret. "I didn't mean for them to trace it back here," she said. Jayden stared at her. She stepped forward. "I thought if I blurred your name, left out the location, they'd never find it." His jaw clenched. "I thought..." She swallowed. "I thought the truth needed to be told." Jayden stood slowly. He didn't yell. He didn't shove. He just picked up the sketchbook, flipped it open, and held the drawing toward her. The cracked wall, The eye behind it. Is this what you wanted? He asked, voice raw and cracked. Clara's breath caught. No. Jayden pointed to the wall in the room. He was safe here. I didn't know they'd come so fast, she whispered. Jayden's voice rose, not loud but sharper. He trusted me. Clara nodded, eyes full of something between guilt and fear. I know. And maybe I destroyed that. But I wasn't trying to expose him. I was trying to expose them. Jayden looked away. Clara walked to the far side of the room, staring at the space Echo used to stand in. It wasn't just Echo they hurt, Jayden. There were others. Dozens, maybe more. What they did, it was buried. She turned to him. Your silence kept him alive. But maybe my voice could stop it from happening again. Jayden didn't answer. He sat back down, pulled out a fresh page, and started drawing. Not walls this time, not cracks. He drew Echo, but he drew him leaving. Head turned, hooves in motion, moonlight above him, and behind something breaking. Not a wall, a boy. Clara watched, and she understood. Jayden didn't hate her, not exactly, but something had shifted. The bunker didn't feel sacred anymore. It felt hollow. Echo wasn't just a secret now. He was a story, and stories once told couldn't be put back. Jayden kept drawing, line by line, until Echo was out of the frame. Until only the moon remained. And a hand. Reaching, but never quite touching. They came at dawn. Black SUVs with no plates. Dustless boots. Voices that didn't yell, didn't explain, didn't ask. Jayden wasn't there when it happened. He had gone to James's trailer for oats and a new harness strap. The moment he saw the smoke rising from the canyon trail dust, not from wind, but from men, he ran. Fast. Faster than he ever had. By the time he reached the bunker, the sound of hooves was already gone. They had taken him. Echo. Gone. Jayden's knees buckled the moment he reached the empty stall. The water trough still trembled. The hoofprints hadn't even dried. On the wall, his charcoal drawings of cracks and eyes and moonlight now looked like desperate graffiti. There was nothing left. Just a silence too loud to bear. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He stood up slowly, stepped to the center of the bunker, and began tearing it apart. He ripped down the tarp that covered the back wall. He smashed the feed bucket. He overturned the old trough and flung the metal pan so hard it bent against the floor. His breathing turned to growls. His fists collided with the wall once, twice again, until blood smeared across the concrete. Still he kept going. His hand pulsed hot and broken. Splinters of bone throbbed beneath torn skin. And finally, when his body gave out, he collapsed against the far wall and pressed his forehead to it, eyes wide and furious. He lifted his hand, dragged his blood across the wall, and wrote in uneven lines. Echo isn't mute. We just never listened. Then the room went still. Hours passed before someone found him. Sheriff Gaines had called James. The old man stood in the entrance to the bunker like a ghost revisiting his own burial site. Jayden didn't turn around. He didn't have to. James walked over slowly, boots crunching against scattered debris. He lowered himself beside Jayden with a groan. The silence between them was full, thick. I know, James said finally. They didn't wait. Didn't ask. Jayden's breath was shallow. They called it government reclamation, James added. Said he was property, that he had markers in his DNA. Neural imprints, still registered to a program they claimed was shut down. Jayden didn't move. They're taking him to a holding facility east of Tonopah. Military lab. Same place they buried the others. Jayden's jaw clenched. James looked at him, not like a teacher or a mentor, but like someone who understood the cost of being silenced. I've seen a lot of things, kid, James said. But nothing like that horse, or what he did to you. Jayden blinked. You didn't speak, and still you had a voice. I saw it. In how you looked at him, and how he moved with you. The world don't always hear boys like you. But that doesn't mean you're not saying something. Jayden turned slowly toward him. His eyes were bloodshot, his face streaked with dust and dried tears. But in his stare was something else now. Defiance. James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. They've got Echo under 24-hour surveillance. But someone leaked the story already. Might have been the reporter. Maybe someone else. Either way, people are asking questions. He unfolded the paper, an early print of a news article. The headline read, Silence stolen the horse they tried to erase. Jayden stared at it. Below the headline was a blurry image of Echo eyes, calm posture, noble, standing next to a boy with his face cropped out. But it was him. He knew it. So would anyone who looked close enough. They think he's a weapon, James said. But they don't understand. He wasn't made. He survived. Jayden touched the dried blood on his knuckles. Then slowly he stood. The bunker was no longer sacred. It had been violated, just like his mother's silence had been misunderstood, just like his own stillness had been ignored. Now they wanted to study Echo's brain, slice open what they didn't understand, sterilize what they feared. Jayden wouldn't let them. That night, the town held an emergency community meeting. They called it a public discussion, but it was a performance. Fold-out chairs, microphones that screeched, officials in khakis and badges, men with earpieces standing near the back. They said it was about regional safety, public concern, national interest. Jayden sat in the third row, hood over his head, hands clenched in his lap. They didn't know who he was. To them, he was just another boy in another dusty town, sitting quietly while adults talked around him. Clara was there. She sat in the corner, notepad in hand, face pale regret painted across every line. They never looked at her either. They spoke in measured tones about classified material, biological anomalies, reclamation protocols. They said Echo was part of a historic project, that the extraction had been humane, that the facility in Tonopah would ensure the animal's safety and scientific contribution. Someone asked why the horse couldn't be relocated to a sanctuary. They dodged. Someone else asked what they planned to do to him. They answered with jargon. Jayden stood. A murmur rippled through the room. No one called on him. He didn't wait. He walked to the front of the community hall. Sheriff Gaines moved to stop him. James shook his head once. Let him speak. Jayden didn't take the microphone. He stood in front of the table of officials and pulled a marker from his coat. Then he walked to the back wall, an old whiteboard used for town announcements, and began to write. The markers squeaked. The room fell silent. Word by word, he scrawled, "Echo isn't a weapon. He's what happens when love outlasts abuse." Then slowly, with hands trembling, he pulled down his hood. People gasped. Some recognized him. Others only saw a child. A thin boy with 2 old eyes and scars on his knuckles. He turned to face the room. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. His presence was enough. His silence screamed. Clara stood slowly, tears welling. James watched with pride that stung like pain. And one by one, others stood too. Kids, parents, veterans, teachers. A wave of stillness that turned into solidarity. Jayden stepped down, walked back to his seat. And as he sat, the last thing he wrote unspoken, but felt echoed louder than any headline. He was never silent. You just never listened. And the world finally had no choice but to hear. Snow came early that year. Fine white flakes drifted down over the Elko hills, like ash from a long-dead fire. The sky was silent, smeared in silver, and the desert wore frost like a new skin, one that softened the edges of every cracked thing. Inside the town hall, the tension had weight. Jayden sat still in the center of the crowd, surrounded by grown-ups arguing in circles. Their words ricocheted off the walls like thrown stones. Scientific value, symbolic preservation, federal jurisdiction, animal rights, public fear. No one could agree on what Echo meant. To half the room, he was a miracle, a survivor, a sacred emblem of endurance and mystery. A creature that belonged not to the past or to the government, but to them, to the children, to the forgotten, to the ones who had no voice until he gave them one. To the other half, he was a phenomenon to be studied. Neural anomalies, DNA strands with undocumented sequences, the potential for understanding animal empathy, sensory mapping, even intelligence. His brain might hold patterns the Pentagon could only dream of. And if they didn't act now, they said the opportunity would vanish. Jayden heard none of it. Not really. He watched lips move, watched fingers point, and fists pound tables. But it was like watching people argue underwater. Muffled, distant, already lost. Echo was still being held in Tonopah, isolated, monitored, silenced. The place they put him in had no windows. Jayden knew this from Clara, who had driven down and begged for a press tour. They refused, of course. But a technician had told her in secret, "He doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep, he just stands there, staring at the wall." Jayden imagined it too easily. The cold white walls, the buzzing lights, the steel floor beneath hooves that once danced over sand. The stillness, the loneliness. He imagined Echo calling out, but this time Jayden couldn't come. That night, Jayden sat by himself at the edge of the dry riverbed. The snow didn't touch him. It collected in his hair on his shoulders, but he didn't feel it. His sketchbook sat open in his lap. He didn't draw Echo. He drew himself, a small figure standing before an open gate. An Echo mid-gallop on the other side, leaping into a forest made of moonlight and wind. Jayden stared at it for a long time. Then he took out a sheet of paper and began to write. The letter was short. "To whom it may concern. My name is Jayden Locke. I am the one who found Echo. I am the one he trusted. He is not property. He is not data. He is not a tool. He is a being. He is more alive than most people I know. Please let him go. Let him be what he was before we tried to name him. Let him run. I give up my claim. Not because he doesn't belong to me, but because I never truly owned him. Jayden." He folded the paper, sealed it in an envelope, and walked 5 miles to James's trailer in the early light of morning. James was already outside brushing frost off a feed trough. Jayden handed him the envelope. James didn't ask what it was. He just took it, read the name on the front, and nodded once. "I'll get it where it needs to go." Jayden walked away without looking back. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 days later. They called it a release, but it felt like a funeral. No microphones, no speeches. Just a stretch of snow-covered wilderness on the edge of a national reserve where wild mustangs had once roamed. Now, thanks to pressure from the public, a corner of that land had been quietly designated as a sanctuary. A silver trailer backed up to the gate. Inside, Echo stood still, not sedated, not chained, just waiting. Jayden approached the ramp slowly. People lined the fence line, but no one moved. Not a whisper, not a breath. Jayden climbed the ramp. At the top, he paused. Echo turned his head, and for the first time in weeks, their eyes met. Jayden raised a hand. Echo stepped forward. They stood inches apart, snow swirling between them like breath. Jayden didn't speak. He placed his palm gently on his chest, over his heart, then reached out and laid that same palm on Echo's forehead. A beat passed. Then Echo exhaled soft, steady, and stepped down the ramp into the snow. He moved slow at first, head-high, nostrils flaring. Then he broke into a trot, then a gallop, and then freedom. The trees swallowed him like a promise kept. Jayden stood on the ramp unmoving. His breath turned to fog in the air, but his eyes never left the forest. Clara stood beside James at the gate. She wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered. He let him go. James nodded. No, he said. He freed him. As the last trace of Echo vanished between the trees, the clouds parted. The moon, full and bright, shone down on the snow. And there beneath Jayden's feet, a crack split through the frozen ground. Thin, silent, but real. The earth had shifted. The wall inside him had finally broken. And the silence was no longer empty. It was full of everything Echo had left behind. Winter bled into spring. The snow softened. The wind carried fewer ghosts. And in the valley just north of Elko, something new took root quietly, without ribbon cuttings or press conferences. It was called the Echo Program. There was no sign at first, just a split-rail fence curling around a shallow pasture, a refurbished barn with sun-bleached boards, and a collection of mismatched chairs scattered under a wide cottonwood tree. The kids arrived one by one, some with bruises they couldn't name, others with silences that wrapped around them like 2 small coats. Jayden was waiting. He never introduced himself. He didn't have to. He sat cross-legged in the dirt with a box of colored pencils and a stack of sketchbooks, letting the wind do the welcoming. No lectures. No icebreakers. Just a boy who once stopped speaking in a circle of children who hadn't yet been heard. The first girl, Maya, didn't touch the paper for a week. Then one morning she picked up a pencil and drew a horse. It had no eyes, no legs, only a heart. Jayden didn't say anything. He slid his sketchbook beside hers and opened it to a drawing of Echo, standing beneath a storm head, raised lightning in his chest. Maya smiled for the first time. By the 3rd week, the silence in the circle began to hum, not with words, but with something deeper. The children drew, they colored, they painted whole stables of silent horses, black-blue, translucent. Some wore wings, some had scars. All of them had no mouths. It became their language. One boy, Tyler, hadn't spoken since his stepfather broke his wrist and blamed it on a fall. But after a session brushing one of the rescue horses, he picked up a piece of charcoal and wrote on the barn wall. He listened. That same night, Clara arrived with a camera and a tremble in her hands. She didn't ask to film at first. She just sat, watched, listened. When she did speak, it was to Jayden softly, cautiously. I want to tell the story. Not the government's version, not the lab reports. Yours. Jayden didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed her a stack of drawings. At the top, Echo mid-run Maine whipping through stars. Below that, Echo and Jayden standing at opposite ends of a broken wall, reaching for each other through the cracks. Clara took them home. She wept while scanning every image. 6 months later, her documentary premiered at a local indie theater, projected onto a screen made from stitched bedsheets. The title faded in slowly, word by word. Echo voices from the silent. It was raw, unpolished, human. It featured no voiceovers, only music, low, aching cello harmonies, whine through open plains, and the sounds of hooves on dirt. Clips showed the children drawing, hugging horses, pressing their foreheads to soft muzzles, laughing in that broken way joy has when it's learning to be real again. Near the end of the film, the screen held on Jayden. He stood in front of a group of new kids. No script, no podium. He wasn't speaking, not with his mouth. In front of him was a whiteboard. He picked up a black marker and drew a horse, quick, bold strokes. The legs first, then the mane. The eyes were soft, alive. Then he hesitated. When he got to the mouth, he paused. The children held their breath. Jayden leaned forward, and for the first time in years, he drew the mouth. A simple line, but open. The theater gasped. On screen, Jayden turned and pointed to the drawing, then touched his chest. He turned back to the board and began drawing symbols. Stars, tears, handprints, a cracked wall, a horse running, a child watching. Then he pressed play on a small speaker beside him. A soft song began, no lyrics, just a lone piano, slow and tender. And Jayden began to move. He traced his hand in the air, as if painting what couldn't be drawn. He gestured, stepped, turned. His body became the story. No voice, but no one needed it. He told everything, how echo was found. How silence wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of too much. How letting go was the only way to be free. The screen faded to black. Then a final line appeared. Some sounds are only heard by the heart. The audience sat in stillness. Then one person clapped, then another, until the room filled with the kind of applause that doesn't cheer it thanks. Outside, under the stars, Jayden stood with Clara. "He's still running, you know," she said. Jayden nodded. He didn't ask how she knew. She didn't need proof. They both felt it. Echo was out there. Maybe alone, maybe with others, but running. And every time a child touched a horse with trembling hands, every time a story was told without a word, every time a pencil sketched a horse with no mouth, only eyes that understood, Echo was there. Jayden didn't speak that night. He didn't need to. He turned toward the field where the wind rushed through the trees like breath through ribs. He raised his hand, not to wave, but to honor, to signal. And somewhere far beyond fences and memory, the sound of hooves struck earth like a heartbeat. Echo answered. The moon rose full and low the way it always did over the Nevada hills, as if it remembered. Its light bled silver across the high plains, catching the ripples of dry grass and the glint of melting frost. The wind moved gently now, as if careful not to wake anything sacred. And through that quiet, through the shadows and the hush of open land, he ran. Echo, older now, his mane streaked with gray, his frame leaner, but his stride unbroken. He ran not out of fear, not for survival. He ran because he could. No halter, no reins, no fences, just earth and breath and memory. His hooves pounded a rhythm older than language. He was a ghost no longer. Not a secret, not a possession, just motion, just life. And the moon cast his shadow long behind him. If someone had been watching, and there were always watchers, they might have said the shadow beside Echo didn't belong to him, that it was smaller, lighter, human. But no one watched that night. No one needed to. The boy who used to run beside him didn't anymore. He had found a different path. Back in Elko, in the barn that had become more sanctuary than shelter, Jayden sat beside a boy named Elias. Elias was 10. He had come from a home where silence was enforced, not chosen. Where locked doors weren't safety, but prisons. Where words were weapons and absence, a kind of cruelty. He hadn't spoken in 2 years, and for the first 3 weeks at Echo program, he didn't move much either. Just sat in the far corner of the barn, tracing circles on his jeans, watching the other children draw their voiceless horses. But that day was different. That day he stood in front of the drawing wall. Dozens of papers were taped to the wood, each one a child's version of the same archetype, a horse with no mouth. Some drawn in fury, others with trembling reverence, but all silent. Elias stared at one in particular. It was Jayden's. The paper was wrinkled and old, but the lines were clean. Echo stood tall in moonlight eyes, wide legs, mid-gallop, but still no mouth. Elias reached out slowly, like he was touching something alive. His fingertips brushed the sketch. Jayden watched from a few feet away, not moving, not interrupting. Then Elias whispered so softly that Jayden almost thought he imagined it. "Cháu cũng muốn chạy." Jayden froze. The words lingered in the air. "Cháu cũng muốn chạy." I want to run too. Jayden's eyes burned. He walked to the wall slowly, carefully. Elias looked up at him, unsure. Jayden knelt beside him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He picked up a charcoal pencil, and on a fresh sheet, he began to draw. But this time he didn't stop at the eyes. He didn't hesitate at the mouth. He drew it open, not screaming, not laughing, just open, alive. Elias stared at it, then at Jayden. Then, without another word, he took the pencil and drew another beside it. A smaller horse, its mouth open too, and they both smiled. Later that night, when the children had gone home, and the barn lights dimmed to a soft golden hush, Jayden stood in front of the drawing wall, alone. He ran his fingers over the taped pages. So many stories, so many voiceless voices. But not anymore. He reached the back wall of the barn, the one that had remained blank since the beginning. He stepped forward, and in the center painted a single line, a long jagged crack, then another, and another, until the shape of a great broken wall emerged fractured but still standing. Then he dipped his finger in dark red paint and pressed it gently to the crack, right where the heart would be. He stepped back and smiled. Outside, the moon crested over the ridge. It spilled across the desert, across the canyons, and broken fences, until it reached the first sandbank outside Elko. There, a gust of wind lifted an old sketchbook from where it had been resting on a stone left behind on purpose. It opened to the last page, a single image. Echo galloping under the moon, mouth open, mane wild. And in the corner, a boy not chasing but watching. At peace. The wind turned the page. Then again, until the book closed, and was still. Fade out. The screen goes black. Then, one by one, in slow dissolve, hundreds of images appear. Drawings of horses, all drawn by children, all without mouths. But then, in each one, a tiny curve, a smirk, a breath, a smile. Each horse begins to change, until in the final frame, every single one is smiling. Moonlight washes across them, and beneath them, a final line. We were never silent. You just had to learn how to hear us.